So the topic for today is appropriate technology. I think that most people have probably heard that term. It's been around for several decades, but in more recent years, development organizations have slowly kind of migrated away from that. Back in the 1970s, the 80s, and 90s, there was a huge focus on appropriate technology because I think there was an understanding that there were barriers uh, to bringing all of the technologies that existed in first world countries, and I say that in apostrophes. But yeah, there are these huge barriers about how do we bring all of the technologies that exist in first world countries into third world countries. So, for example, farming in Kentucky in the United States, where I grew up at, back in the 1940s and 50s, translated into this massive monoculture type of farming where there were these massive tractors and combines that were used, and people who worked in the community development organization realized that this simply wasn't capable. There was not enough money. There was all these technical barriers to introducing this type of technology, and so the idea was what types of appropriate technology can be introduced to local communities around the world. We're going to talk about what appropriate technology is, but one of the things I want to say is that unfortunately, I think that there has been, especially in the last 10, 15 years, less and less focus on appropriate technology and more focus on trying to impose, the most modern day technologies that exist on small communities, or introduce, all of the technologies that exist today into local communities. So we're going to divide our talk up today into four different sections. Quickly, I always talk about the history of the topic. So, where did appropriate technology come from? We want to talk a little about criteria. What aspects, what characteristics of appropriate technology should we know about? We're going to talk about a few examples, and then just to try and tie this subject back to a hot topic matter, something that's in the news today. I think it's good to reflect on how artificial intelligence relates or does not relate to appropriate technology. So let's start with the definition. This is a fairly widespread and widely held definition of appropriate technology. It says that appropriate technology is a movement, so it's not just a technique, it's a movement and its manifestations encompassing the choice and application of technology that is: one, small scale in nature; two, affordable for local communities and local individuals; three, decentralized; number four, laborious or labor intensive; number five, energy efficient; number six, environmentally sustainable; and lastly, locally autonomous. So we're going to look at these one by one as we go through. But before we look at the 7 bullet points, I want to talk also. We're going to talk about the issue of choice and application. That's something I think is extremely important. That the most important facet of appropriate technologies for local communities around the world is the fact that they have the ability to choose whether they want to use that or not, and how it is applied. And I think that's a huge issue, because when it comes to technologies today, the vast majority of us don't really think about whether we choose to use it or not. There is a mentality that infects our world today, that this kind of techno optimism that says that any new technology that comes out is automatically good. I think that we've lost the ability to actually reflect on whether certain things are beneficial or what we lose by adopting new technology. And so appropriate technology starts by saying that communities need to have the autonomy and the right to decide whether they adopt that, whether it's a choice whether certain technologies are adopted or not. All right, so let's go a little bit for the history. I guess the first person who really started speaking about appropriate technology was a thinker, a philosopher, a writer from the UK, from the United Kingdom, called E.F. Schumacher. He is most famous for his book called Small is Beautiful. It's a book that was written back in the 60s, I believe. And he didn't necessarily use the term appropriate technology. He used the term intermediate technology. But the same principle, same ideas. And Schumacher argued that technology, any type of technology, should be designed in a way that promotes 3 values: health, beauty, and permanence. And so when we think about that, those three ideas of what technology, it isn't necessarily what we think of, when we think of certain technologies today. So go back to farming. These massive tractors and combines and huge agro machinery, that has come to define, modern day industrial agriculture in a global marketplace. Those things are obviously, they don't promote health, because you have these monocultures that rely on enormous amounts of agrochemicals and pesticides. I would say that they probably don't promote beauty. When you look over a landscape where you have tens of thousands of acres of one crop, maybe some people find that interesting, but when compared to the beauty of a functional ecosystem with diversity in trees and animals, that type of technology is certainly not beautiful. And it's also not permanent. And we're going to talk about permanence as well. Whereas, technology should appropriate technology are those technologies that allow us to subsist well in our places. And one of the problems that we talked about in a prior class, about these massive agro technologies today, is that we're drawing down the main resources that we depend on. So these massive combines and tractors and the application of agrochemicals, and all the whole suite of technology that's thrown not only on farmers in the United States but everywhere in the world today. We're essentially we're eroding our topsoil, we're poisoning our watersheds in a way that we simply can't continue to subsist that way, right? So those types of large scale technologies certainly don't fit the bill for what E.F. Schumacher had mentioned, his three main criteria, which are technology that promotes healthful living, technology that promotes beauty, and permanence. He also says that technology should not be considered solely as a means to an immediate end. It should be evaluated in terms of its contribution to a production process or a beneficial activity, not only for its immediate users, but also for society in general. So technology needs to be, a lot of times we take technologies that are introduced into the marketplace and we evaluate them without necessarily looking about how it reflects, to all these other different aspects of community. So for example, let's take the smartphone, right? The smartphone, I'm sure all of us have one. Almost every community around the world, except for some very, very isolated indigenous groups and rural places, almost everyone has access to this technology. And there are certainly benefits. If you talk to the people who promote these technologies, they can rattle off all sorts of benefits about connectivity and how small communities can use this to better communicate with their families and loved ones, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, all of these supposed benefits. But we also need to look at, what are some of the effects of that, not only for the people who use it, but also for society, right? And so there's all these different, negative consequences that are becoming ever more, that we're seeing about technology addiction, the break apart of families, people who, are spend however many 10, 12 hours in front of a screen every day. So Schumacher said, look, we need to take technologies and we need to look at it in a wider lens of what this does, not only how it contributes to a certain process, but how it affects the community as a whole, how it affects the livelihoods of people who live in a shared space. And he decried notions that growth is good and that bigger is better. That's one of the things that technology today seems to be focused on. If any sort of technology can promote economic growth, it's seen as automatically good and accepted. If it promotes bigger livelihoods, more economic activity, then we automatically accept it. I guess along the same lines, a contemporary of E.F. Schumacher was a thinker called Leopold Kohr, and he followed off of Schumacher and he said, look, the crises that we face today is a crisis of bigness. He lived and worked during, the high years of the Cold War. when if you were on the left side of the political spectrum, the problem was capitalism and free market growth. If you were on the other side of the political spectrum, the problem was communism and state-controlled growth. And he said, look, no, we need to go beyond this dichotomy of two of the right-left political system and trying to blame one another. So the problem is that our system has gotten simply too big. Both communism and capitalism, socialism and free market economics, all of them are wedded to this idea that more economic growth is necessary, more industry, larger businesses, they might disagree on who controls, the modes of production and things like that. But he said the problem is that we've gotten too big. We no longer are connected to any sort of place, any sort of ecological reality. And here's a quote from him. He says, "Wherever something is wrong, something is too big. The mass has become too great. If the human body becomes ill, it is, as in the case of cancer, because a cell or a group of cells has begun to grow beyond its allotted narrow limits." And so this is that's one of the issues, is that we have developed an economic system and the technologies that support that that rely on unlimited, nonstop growth. And if we, growth, unlimited, nonstop growth in any other context is going to be bad. And so he takes the issue of the human body. If anything continues to grow without stopping, it's a cancer, and it'll eventually kill its host, which is us, right? If the body of a people becomes sick with the fever of aggression, brutality, collectivism, or mass idiocy, it is not because it has been the victim of misdirection or mental derangement. It's because human beings, as charming individuals or in small aggregations, have been fused into over-concentrated social units like mob, unions, cartels, or great powers. And so Kohr, like E.F. Schumacher, had this idea that small is beautiful. And technologies, if they were going to be useful, needed to promote healthful, beautiful, and permanent living in small scale, right? One other thinker, as we go into this, the history of this, Wendell Berry. I've quoted him in several past classes. He's a farmer and a poet and a writer, essayist from the United States, from Kentucky. And he, back in the 1980s, I think it was, or 1990s, wrote an essay, a really short essay for a magazine called "Why I'm Not Going to Buy a Computer." And this was when, computers were starting to become ubiquitous and everybody had one, especially as a writer, it's seen as this great tool to, help people write better and become more, more prolific at their writing. And he sat down and he said, I want to think about this. Why is a computer going to help me become a better writer? And he wrote this really convincing essay that said, no, it really doesn't help me. And so he ended up creating a set of, I think, 9 criteria for the adoption of any type of new technology. He thought about this. He said, look, before I introduce a technology into my life, it has to fit 9 different criteria. And he didn't use the word appropriate technology. He mentioned any technology. But I would say that the criteria that he lays out here is good for helping us think about what types of appropriate technology can be good and helpful to help us subsist in a way that promotes beauty, health, and permanence in our local communities. And so he says, 1, the new tool or technology should be cheaper than the one it replaces. In the world we live in today, that's almost never the case. New technologies are increasingly more expensive, right? Number 2, it must be at least as small in scale as the one it replaces. For example, that doesn't mean necessarily that, for example, all old technologies are worth maintaining. But for example, he uses the case of small scale farmers around the world, where the laborious and time consuming tasks of threshing the grain that they harvest used to be, would take weeks on end. And so the application, for example, of small scale grain threshers that can be operated manually or with a little of electricity, was essentially small scale. It was a way for local communities to save time, to perhaps improve their harvesting practices, but at the same time, it wasn't at a scale that essentially took the autonomy and the agency away from the local community. Number 3, the new technology must do work that is clearly and demonstrably better than the one it replaces. I mean, the issue of good work. And so he takes the issue of writing. He said, look, the computer doesn't make me a better writer. You know, I can write with it. He continues to write essays and novels and poetry, and he writes by hand. And, he takes a pencil and a piece of paper, which are technology, a type of technology. And he says, like, for me, a computer doesn't help me write better. And he said a lot of times when I've tried to use a computer, it actually dumbs me down because instead of using my education about how to form words on paper, you end up using all of these online tools. And today, with the adoption of large language models like ChatGPT, young people today don't even write. There's this issue about high school and universities that if you give a student an essay that they need to research and write about, all they do is tap into ChatGPT, the question, and essentially the tool does the work for you. So I don't know if we can say that that is good work in the sense that it promotes knowledge, that it provokes depth of thought, etc. Number 4, he says that appropriate technologies and good technologies should use less power than the one it replaces. We're starting to get into some of the environmental implications of certain types of appropriate technologies. And today, there are a lot of new technologies that come out that say that they save energy, that they're much more energy efficient than ones that they replace. So, for example, light bulbs. A lot of us used to use the old types of light bulbs that used 100 watts per hour. And today now we have the LED bulbs that are much more efficient. That's a new type of technology. So that's one issue of one that uses less. But there's also an issue of, a lot of times as things become more efficient, we tend to use them more, and that's a problem. So the idea is also, how can we adopt technologies that use less energy, but at the same time don't encourage us to use more and more of the resource, right? If possible, you should use some form of solar energy, such as the body. So how is that technology being powered? And this is the issue of using less power, but trying to use renewable sources. Number 6, the new technology, the appropriate technology, should be repairable by a person of ordinary intelligence, provided they have the necessary tools. We live in an economy of the famous term planned obsolescence, where it's obvious that industry and manufacturers and businesses around the world are designing things that are cheaper and cheaper, whose useful lifespan is shorter and shorter, essentially to oblige us to purchase more and more things. Obviously there are all sorts of economic and ecological correlations to that. When we have to buy a new phone every 2 years, or if a tool that we use on our farm breaks down after a couple harvests, then you have to purchase things, and nothing is repairable, right? If you want to try and repair your iPhone, most of us have no idea how to do that. If my computer breaks down, I don't know how to fix it. And so the idea is that new technologies need to be repairable. They need to be ordinary people should be able to fix it and expand its lifespan, and that's something that most technologies today simply don't allow for. And again, if you do need it repaired, or it should be able to be purchased and repaired as close to home as possible. And we're going to talk about one of the issues of decentralization, that instead of concentrating all of these different things in urban centers or in centers of technology and in commerce and industry, trying to allow technologies to be made, distributed, sold, and repaired, within local communities. We talked last time about the Amish people and how their decision to forego the automobile instead rely on horse-drawn carriages is essentially a way to embody this value or this criteria. So look, if a horse breaks down, if it needs a new horseshoe, we don't have to purchase new tires, which comes from rubber that's harvested in Brazil, that's sent to Indonesia, where it's made into rubber and then shipped across the world. No, I mean, a horse can be fed locally. It can be trained locally. If it needs new horseshoes, it can be done by a local smith. The waste from that can be recycled back into the land. And so, that's one of Wendell Berry's criteria for the adoption of new technology, that it should be able to be purchased, repaired, used as close to home as possible. Similarly, it must come from a small shop or private shop that takes it in for maintenance and repair. And lastly, it should not replace or interrupt anything good and beneficial and worthwhile that already exists. And this includes family and community relationships. And that's, I think, one of the big ones that, like I mentioned, we don't think about what is being lost by the adoption of new technologies. You could say that, again, returning to, the technologies we rely on, like the computer I'm talking on today. Unfortunately, the screen technologies which have come to dominate our world today, they do interrupt things that are good, such as family and community relationships. Yesterday, I was picking up my children from school, and I showed up a little bit late, and all of the students from her class were, outside of the school, sitting on kind of like on the sidewalk, and they were together, but all of them had their smartphones out and they were playing Fortnite or something like that. It's one of these games. That I'm getting older, so I don't know what that is, but it's one of these online games where kids play together, in these online worlds, but they really don't interact. And it was fascinating for me to see that how, education has interrupted childhood and fun and joy and playing. And there are definitely, like I said, advantages to the internet and smartphones and technologies we're able to sit here and share today, but we also need to take into context that technologies like this do replace and interrupt things that are good that already exist, and we need to take that into account. Okay, so let's go back. Remember when I talked about our definition? One of the things I think is very important is the issue of choice and application, right? We don't need to be slaves to technology. Technologies exist. One of the reasons that human beings throughout, our history have done so well, one of the reasons that we continue to be the main species on this planet, is because we have the ability to transform, the resources around us into technologies that support us. On a biological level, we're pretty unremarkable, right? We don't have big teeth. We're not really good predators. We're kind of not nearly as skilled as our cousin the apes and things like that. But what we do have is a brain and the ability to transform, the technologies around us. So the adoption of fire, hundreds of thousands of years ago, stone tools that allowed us to hunt, all of these things are technologies that allowed humanity to continue to grow into who we are today. But today, I would say that we have essentially become enslaved to any sort of technological innovation. We embrace new technologies with limited, if any, public discourse about the pros and cons, the benefits and the drawbacks, and some of the very real dangers that a lot of these technologies may bring about. And so, for example, I want to talk about this today, but artificial intelligence. Move to the next one. ChatGPT, it came out earlier this year. They've been working on these large language models for a long time. And they finally made it publicly available, right? And almost overnight, according to the latest available data, ChatGPT, which is just one of the many large language models, there's Google has one called Bard, and Facebook's working on one. But essentially, almost overnight, more than 100 million users signed up. I just checked this morning. That's up to almost 300 million users. The website currently generates 1.8 billion visitors a month. This user and traffic growth was achieved in a record 3-month period. So from February this year when it came out until April, hundreds of millions of people automatically downloaded this and started using that. I don't know if, within a month after something is adopted, having such wide scale adoption of this really doesn't allow us to stop and reflect as a community, as individuals, about some of the benefits and drawbacks. And one of the things that I think is becoming more and more obvious is that the people who created these technologies, shortly after they released it to the public and they saw millions of people come up, there was this movement by Elon Musk and the developer of ChatGPT and this guy named Gregory Hinton, who's considered the godfather of artificial intelligence. They said, look, we got to stop this. We don't know what we're doing. And, the founders of this new technology are saying, look, we're not sure what's happening with how these large language models and artificial intelligence are developing. There's all this possibility for developing, more fake news, and people not being able to understand, what's created. And then also this potential existential risk that they talk about, of computers become smarter than we are. I'm not an expert on the subject, but I think that the fact that we didn't allow ourselves an ability to stop and think and discuss the pros and the cons, that essentially, I think, disqualifies artificial intelligence from the definition of appropriate technology, because it doesn't allow us, again, these important two things: the choice and the application. Because if you're not having a debate, if you're not having a discussion on a community-wide level, then you're not choosing, you're just adopting, right? And so again, I think that moving back to the issue of community development, when a community, a new technology becomes available, I think it's extremely important, as community development organizations, as people who are leaders in the community, say, look, before we adopt this, let's stop and think. Let's talk. Let's decide if we're going to use it, and if so, how we're going to apply it. That is one of the, I'd say that the principal aspect of appropriate technology that we need to take into account. And again, I always return to the Amish because I grew up around them, and I think they're a fascinating community. But for example, there is a need for honest reflection and debate. And this is a picture of a typical Amish community. And a lot of times, I've mentioned this, but a lot of times people have this false idea that the Amish, due to religious fundamentalism or extremism, simply deny all technologies. And that's not true. They come together once a year, and discuss, look, here are some of the options. Should we accept this? Yes or no? What are the benefits? What are the drawbacks? And so one Amish community around my home, they have decided recently that they will use renewable solar electricity for their workshops. So if you drive around the Amish community, you'll see that the businesses, where they make furniture, where they, do all these other different things they do, have solar panels, where, allows them to use power tools and other things like that. But in their homes, they still will not use any sort of electricity. And the idea is that they say that, look, if we introduce electricity into our homes, then we're just one step away from introducing TV and introducing computers. And he said, look, we believe, as a community, that is what separates something that is good that already exists, which is the time they spend together as a family, having influence over our children, instead of just saying, here's a screen, go do that. So the community, comes together and reflects on this, and they adopt certain technologies when they think it can be beneficial for the community, but they also reject certain technologies when they feel that it could be, negative. And that's something we don't have on a large scale, right? Okay, so real quick, I want to do a few examples of appropriate technologies that I've seen in different projects that I've worked on, different consulting jobs I've done over the years. And I'm going to try and tie those back to the criteria that we mentioned here: small scale, affordability for local communities, decentralized, labor intensive, energy efficient, and environmentally sustainable, and locally autonomous. So the first one, there's a small community in Guatemala, in rural Guatemala, where I used to live and work. The community is called Chel, and they live in this beautiful mountain setting where there's lots and lots of rivers. And about 15 years ago, there was this interest from huge multinational corporations and the Guatemalan government to try and develop a series of about 25 mega hydroelectric dams. The idea was that Guatemala wants to transition to more renewable energy, and hydroelectricity was, seen as an opportunity. And so essentially the government came in together with these multinational corporations and started to try and expropriate, the resources of these beautiful, pristine rivers to develop mega hydroelectric dams. And the idea would be then that they were going to transfer this electricity into urban centers to support industry, to support urban populations, et cetera. This local community, Chel, had a major resistance movement because they said, well, one of the things is that there was going to be very, very limited payment to local communities. There was because of the size and scale of these massive hydroelectric dams, there was going to be a huge disruption to the river. There's going to be all sorts of environmental damage to the rivers and to the local ecosystems. And the second one, there was also, very limited benefit because the energy was to be exported outside of the community into urban centers, into industrial centers. And so the community resisted and said no. And there was, tense times, and the army was sent in, but eventually the community prevailed. And a couple of years after that, the community said, well, we do have these rivers. And so they essentially were able to acquire some funding to create a small scale hydroelectric dam. This dam to provide electricity for the community, which beforehand did not have any electricity. And so, this type of small scale hydro dam doesn't require these massive, dammed lakes. It doesn't disrupt the flow of the river. There's very, very limited, if any, ecological damage. And the product, which is sustainable, renewable, emissions-free electricity, was kept in the community. And all of the benefits that come with it, having energy, right? It improved, opportunities for schooling. It improved opportunities for small-scale businesses, et cetera. This is an example, I think, of small-scale adoption of certain technologies and attainability by local communities. So, a lot of times the Guatemalan government and these multinational corporations, were billing these mega hydroelectric dams as a appropriate technology. And the idea is that, we got to move away from reliance on fossil fuels and move towards emissions-free electricity for the country. But at the same time that, it wasn't the correct scale. There was going to be huge amounts of damage. Local communities were going to be affected. And eventually what the community decided is that, look, we agree that, there is a need for this, but we're going to do it on our own scale, on a scale that benefits us as a community, as the custodians of this natural resource, and in a way that's attainable for us. Here's another example. Criteria for appropriate technology, decentralization. There's two images here. One is on the right side is a picture of one of the largest centralized solar farms somewhere in the Middle East. I forget if it's the United Arab Emirates or Dubai or something like that. But it's just this massive, hundreds and hundreds of square miles of solar panels. Obviously at this scale, we're going to have to operate with huge corporations, multinational corporations. All of that energy is being, funded by these big corporations. Then it's centralized and dispersed by a centralized energy network. On the left side, we have, a more typical house scale renewable energy system. There's a consultant, a thinker, and a writer called Jeremy Rifkin, and he believes that our future energy grids should resemble much more the picture on the left and the picture on the right. As we transition to renewable energies, he said one of the things we need to do is to move away from centralized electric systems. So appropriate technology, this is the same technology. It's a solar panel. But like we mentioned in the beginning, it's not just the thing in itself. It's not just the item. It's how it's used, how it's designed. And so local autonomous energy grids, are an opportunity to use the technology in a way that doesn't require, these massive solar farms that are centralized in their governance, that local communities have almost no say over pricing structures about where these things are going to be employed. And again, he said, with the right technology, you can adopt a decentralized, renewable solar energy system wherein, every housetop or every rooftop in a community feeds into a local energy grid in a way that, that keeps energy production localized. So there is an opportunity, obviously, to use these things, but it depends always on who owns it, who controls it, and again, the issue of decentralization, right? Let's move to the next one here. Kind of running out of time. I'm going to try and go a little bit quicker. The next one is criteria for appropriate technology. It should be labor intensive, and that's something that's very contradictory. A lot of us think that what we need is more labor saving technologies. We said appropriate technology might mean that we have to work harder. This is an example in Guatemala of I worked with a group of macadamia nut farmers, And there was one organization that wanted to bring this massive machines uh, to process the macadamia nuts, but they were expensive. And it was easy; you just had to push a button and it did it. But what the community eventually decided on were these bicycle powered shelling machines, and it was just as efficient, but what it required is people to get on these bicycle machines and shell their macadamia nuts. And I said one of the most important changes in our relationship to technology is to think that not all hard work is drudgery and misery. Labor intensive work can be rewarding and might be much better for the world. Another criteria is the issue of energy efficiency and environmental sustainability. The picture on the left are these lithium processing fields in South America. As we make this transition to supposedly EVs, electrical vehicles, a lot of times we don't think about, what are some of the environmental implications of that. And lithium farming or mining in South America or China, wherever it is, causes huge amounts of problems. So, as we transition into healthier landscapes or into different types of transportation, we don't need to just think about efficiency, but also about what is the overall environmental impact. Riding a bike, for example, is one of the prime examples of appropriate technology because it's localized in nature. The resources can be fixed by local communities. It does provide faster transportation, etc. Lastly, appropriate technology should also be locally autonomous. This is in South America, there was a group of raisin farmers that I visited once, and they were talking about, okay, we harvest these grapes and we want to make raisins. How do we dry them out? And there were two proposals on the table. One is bringing in these massive electric dehydrators, which used an enormous amount of energy and were expensive. The community was going to take on a loan to take these out. But then there's also another proposal which was saying, let's build these passive solar raisin dryers, which are essentially, they use the energy from the sun, the movement of the wind. It was made by, all of the bricks and adobe bricks were made by local artisans, and it did the exact same thing. And it was a product that was locally autonomous. It didn't use almost any energy because it used the free energy of the sun. And it allowed community to control their own livelihoods. And that's another important aspect of appropriate technology. I'm going to end with two quick examples also of appropriate technology. This is a community in Colombia called Barichara. And if you notice Barichara, one of the things that's interesting is that every house in the entire village is made from adobe or natural construction materials, soil, essentially, dirt that can be found anywhere around. And one of the reasons about 20 years ago, people started making a little bit more money. There were people in the community who had migrated to Bogota, which is the capital, and started bringing back money. And there was this idea, we need to adopt the new technologies of building. Let's start to build using cinder blocks and cement because that's new, that's novel, that's what modern day people do. And the community said, wait a second, these buildings that we have work better, are cheaper, use local resources, and also, as tourism started to gain hold in Colombia, especially once the violence there started to reduce, people came from Bogota and the big cities and said, this is beautiful, this is gorgeous, this is what all of the communities where we used to live in used to look like. And the community was able to maintain that. So there's this whole movement of local people to protect traditional technologies for house construction. And not only is it cheaper, more environmentally sustainable, but it's also it creates economic advantages because tourists come to look at this beautiful village that kind of reflects this idea of what we think a village might have looked like 100 years ago. Another example in a community I worked in was the idea of water filtration. Dirty water is responsible for all sorts of diseases and problems around the world, and a lot of big development projects focus on helping communities or local governments or state governments, install these extremely expensive water purification plants, which have enormous, expensive parts that are not easy to maintain. And a lot of times, once those, water filtration or those water purification plants break down, the local government simply doesn't have the resources to fix them. And understanding that, there was a community that said, look, we understand that we need to do better to protect our water. And so they came up with this very, very simple filtration system that essentially eliminates any and all bacteria and other pathogens that can infect people. It's made from local clay that local artisans were taught how to make that, and they were extremely cheap. And almost every household now adopted this simple water filter that they use. It's cheap, it's locally available. If something breaks, they can go to the local artisan and make a new one. And the result was the exact same as the large scale technology of these massive municipal water filtration plants. The result was that the same thing: less diarrhea in children, less waterborne pathogens, less disease. But in a way, the technology was completely different, right? Um, and so, yeah, just to end real quick, I think that we need to go back to those three criteria that E.F. Schumacher talked about when we adopt a technology. I would say that there's competing visions, right? Whether the vision on the right, health, beauty, and permanence. What type of technology allow us to live healthier lives, more beautiful lives, and more permanent types of states? Or, what we see on the left, technology for more comfort, more fun, more convenience, and constant change, constant supposed growth and improvement. I think that those are different kind of values about that make us, that we should think about, right? And really understand that the technologies that we adopt are definitely going to affect how we live and who we are, right? I guess I'd like to end real quick, as I always do, with a short video on appropriate technology. And then we have, I think, as always, I'd like to leave 10-15 minutes for questions and answers. So let me turn on this video and we'll go from there. Okay, I'm going to turn off my screen share. And yeah, we got about 10-15 minutes for questions. So I will leave it there, Dr. Valson, if you want to facilitate that part.
Thank you very much, Prof. Tobias. What we just got, ladies and gentlemen, is a true appropriate lesson about appropriate technology. It was, as you can testify, an enormous or massive container, so to speak, of multi-dimensional data information about what Professor Tobias defined as appropriate technology. He provided examples that are unique, unrepeatable, sustainable, and available to everyone within a given region. Thank you very much, Prof. Tobias Roberts. You've been always exceptional, awesome, outstanding. Ladies and gentlemen, It is now your turn for your questions, and we will begin with Zakaria Abdi. Go ahead, Zakaria. The community is ready for your question. I lost Zakaria. Let me see. Zakaria, the hand apparently seems to still be up. If you're around, Zakaria, please give us some sign that you are around. If not, dear participants, the floor is yours. As I just spotted Karine Poilang. Karine, go ahead, please.
Thank you so much, Professor. And thank you so much for the presentation. It's very informative and exciting and challenging indeed. I'm in South Africa, and most of the technologies that he presented, it's more kind of like customized for the first world. You know, some of the things that we have to implement here in South Africa, some things we cannot, you know, it's not allowed to get patents of it in South Africa. Like, for example, the lithium plant, you know, it's something that the international technology world or fair trade only allowed in the first world. But I'm asking, like, I'm a community worker. I work in the local economic development department, and I'm responsible for community development, and also, you know, not only economically as well, but environmental and technologically and business-wide. And I would like to know the professor, you know, in some of these technologies that he mentioned, maybe I would like to present one of maybe introduce one of the technologies that he presented. Will he be able to just, you know, provide us the guideline as to how is it done and how is it implemented and how is it assembled? Like, will it be kind of like, will he be there like as a mentor? And the other challenge that is here in Africa is kind of like the financial aspect of it, you know, because resources are not, economic resources are not distributed equally with the third world and the first world. So it's kind of like a challenge. How do we handle those hurdles? You know, how do we make sure that this that he presented is streamlined even to the third world, and that if we want to tap into the opportunities for our communities, how is he going to make sure that it will be easy for us to do that? Thank you.
Thank you, Corinne. Yeah, regarding one of the things that I think is fantastic about the appropriate technology movement is that, especially back in the 1980s and 90s, when it was kind of a hot button topic, was that, you know, there's all of these great websites and books that were written about communities that shared, you know, what types of technologies worked for them. And again, like I said, one of the things about appropriate technologies is I don't think it's necessarily universal, right? You know, what works here in El Salvador might not work in South Africa. What works in South Africa might not work here because conditions are different, communities are different, different histories, different types of cultures, different resources that are available. But at the same time, there's all of these really interesting kind of like guidebooks where communities have, you know, shared what worked for them. And a lot of times, you know, these resources are divided into, you know, different types of technologies. So water filtration or water sanitation. And there's all these different things about can be done. There was a big issue back in how to promote biogas, which is essentially taking, you know, waste from animal manure and human manure and crop residues and turn that into you know energy that can be used on a household scale. And so back in again, there were 70 days. There was this idea that, look, communities can share what has worked for them, you know, following these values of technology. And I can you know, give you all some of these you know, resources to look at. And again, but I would say that the thing is, you know, how can we try and adopt these technologies to the specific characteristics of our places? And then, yeah, when you mention, you know, some of the economic problems, one of the benefits, I think, of appropriate technologies is that they, like I said, one of the criteria was affordability, accessibility by local communities. A lot of times, I think, you know, you know, like I mentioned about the water filtration, you know, purchasing a locally made biofilter using local clay made by a local artisan is obviously going to be much more inexpensive and economically viable for a small scale community than purchasing a $10,000 water filtration plant, or that uses all the latest techs and technology gadgets and things like that. At the same time, there are also funding opportunities. There are still, I think, lots of funding organizations out there that still appreciate appropriate technologies. Funding organizations, for all of the problems, a lot of times they focus on how to get more bang for your buck, and a lot of times appropriate technologies are able to benefit wider audiences, more and more people in a community for a smaller scale price. And so a lot of times, if you can develop a proposal, if you're a community development worker and saying, look, we're going to use an appropriate technology, one, because it works, because it empowers local communities, it allows for local autonomy, but also because it's cheaper. And we're going to be able to help a lot more people than if we were to purchase, the latest technology that hit the market that costs an enormous amount of money. So, those are opportunities. I think that, if you are in the community development world and you're always working to try and, find grants, if you can show that appropriate technology is more cost effective, a lot of times, donor agencies are going to be more open to supporting those type of projects, for example.
Amadou Koita, are you ready for your question?
Yes, I'm ready.
Go ahead.
Hello, yes. Okay, yeah. I would suggest that appropriate technology for African country go to how to get resources, microfinance or microcredit, the access. Sometimes with less than $40, people can make difference in their life. So this can be a focus for us that if we want to get many people out of poverty. So this technology is still here for, I don't know, 20, 30 years, but it doesn't go for mass to cover too many people and don't have resources. So microfinance, microcredit run by, I don't know, state or by institution which doesn't make profit at all, or can be this. I think all this can come later on, water purification, solar water, but they have to have minimum resources to face all this other technology. Thank you. Thank you. Sorry. Yeah. Hello.
No, thank you.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Amadou. I agree. I agree. Yeah, like I said, one of the benefits of appropriate technologies is that they are certainly cheaper, but that doesn't mean that they're necessarily accessible by everyone, right? Yeah, I want to go back to that issue of the biofilters for water technology. I think in the community where we were working, they had a cost of about $40 each. And for a lot of families, obviously that was out of the reach. And so there was also a local credit cooperative, that was local microcredit, like you mentioned. It was owned and operated by the community itself. So that's one of the things I would say, that local credit cooperatives, local credit, microcredit schemes that are owned by their community are, in a sense, a sort of appropriate technology as well, because it reduces reliance on, the big banks that a lot of times charge huge interest rates and who have all of these prohibitive policies that don't allow poor people to access credit. And so what happened was that a lot of people who saw that these microfilter or water filters, biofilters, were extremely functional, were able to access $40 for credit to purchase that and slowly pay it off over a year or two for very low interest rates. So yeah, I think that in many instances, access to credit should go hand in hand with the adoption of all sorts of different types of appropriate technologies, right?
Thank you very much, Prof. Roberts. Going quickly to Graciano. What is your question, Graciano?
Yes, thank you, Tobias. It has really been, an exciting and very interesting presentation, especially you sharing the different, innovation around technology. I'm from Sierra Leone, and it's one of the African countries we are very much kind of interested in terms of especially solar panel installation, and that could generate electricity for maybe communities. So I actually live in a community we started this solar panel project last year, and we had been going through a lot of challenges, especially in terms of working through the process of installation and also the maintenance of the solar panel. So just a kind of request, maybe based on what you've shared so far, maybe if there could be a kind of way you could share your methodology, or maybe learning experience.
I'm very sorry, we are apparently losing
so far
Graciano.
from other communities. Based on your presentation, it will really help in pushing us throughout. Can you hear me? Hello?
Yeah,
Can you hear
you've
me?
been cutting a little bit, but let's allow Prof. Roberts to shed some light or just jump in and make a quick comment about the issue you shared with us, Graciano.
Okay.
Yeah, Graciano,
Thank you.
I didn't hear everything you said, but yeah, I mean, what I think I understood was that a community trying to, so pretty much any rural community that's cut off from the national electricity grid, I would say that solar panels or wind turbines or micro hydro plants like the one I mentioned in Chile, Guatemala, are examples of small scale technology that can be adopted and implemented. But again, if we take the criteria of appropriate technology for small scale renewable energy production, we need to have somebody in the community who knows how to install those, who knows how to fix those. And there's this really interesting, I would encourage you all to look up, there's a place or a educational institution called Barefoot College. I'm pretty sure it's located somewhere in India, and they train almost exclusively women from around the world in different types of appropriate technology, especially, for example, solar panels. So actually, one of the small communities in Guatemala where I used to live, they were able to get a scholarship for 3 or 4 young women, and they went and they traveled to this Barefoot College in India, and they learned everything you need to know about solar panels, installation, how to maintain them, how to fix them when they break down. And these women came back to their village, and when people were able to access enough money to purchase some solar panels, these women were there to offer the service, very low price, to install the solar panels on these houses. So again, it's about how can a technology be made in a way where local people learn about what needs to be learned, and it can be controlled autonomously by the local community. So if I understood you right, Graciano, I think that would be something worth checking out.
Professor Tobias, I don't know how much you would allow us to accommodate. I see 4 hands up. If you want to hear all those 4 questions, let me know, please.
Yeah, no, let's keep going. This is interesting.
Okay, Ike, Edwin, we are ready for your question.
Okay, good evening, everybody. Kedwin is my name, from Nigeria. I hope you're hearing me fine.
Very well.
It's okay. My question goes like this. I see a lot of small boys that didn't go to school, but you see them, some of them producing something like a generator that can generate electricity. You see another one producing a vehicle that somebody can drive with any scrap. Then like one he mentioned, building with local mud. We have what we call bomb bricks here in Nigeria, like in Benue State from where I'm talking. The question here is, there is a standard, like a civil engineer or a construction engineer that is building a house. These local boys, they use these bomb bricks to build a house without standard. So my question now goes like this. These people that didn't go to school and they are able to produce all this, what do we think that can be done to perfect whatever they are doing, whether producing of the generator or mobility or building of house? Please, what is his advice on how to handle this amateur ingenuity?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, Edwin. That I appreciate that, and I think that one of the we talked about this in a previous class as well. That one of the problems with educational institutions is that public education around the world tends to not value local traditional amateur knowledge. So for example, what I think I understood is that a lot of times the knowledge that young boys or that people have just because of their own human ingenuity isn't held on the same level of esteem as engineers who went to university and things like that. And I would say that, again, going back to that example I just used of the Barefoot College, the women who went to learn about solar panel installation and electricity generation, renewable electricity generation, they were how do you say analphabet? They were illiterate. They did not know how to read and write, which is very common in rural Guatemala. But you don't have to know how to learn to read and write to install solar panels. A lot of things, there's ways to garner knowledge outside of traditional education or public education. And so I would say that, when it comes to appropriate technology, a lot of times we need to start by valuing, different knowledge pathways, right? And a lot of times the traditional knowledge that is held by elders in the community, by others, holds the keys to the development of a lot of appropriate technologies. That's not to say that there's not benefit from things that come from the outside, right? But a lot of times, you gotta say it doesn't have to be just the smartest school people who do this. That appropriate technology and its adoption should be available to everyone in the community. No, it doesn't matter what their official educational curriculum might look like, right?
Emmanuel,
okay.
À moi.
Right, thank you very much. Yeah, thank you very much, Doc, for the opportunity. My name is Emmanuel Ewa. I must say that I'm so privileged to be with you. I just joined AIU just about 5-6 days ago, and I'm so much enthused about what is happening here. My story, which would end with a question, goes like this. I'm Cambridge trained. My passion is to work on English language and how we can use that to develop the linguistic capabilities of students, parents, and all those who are involved in the language faculty. Now, pursuing a program with AIU in communication, I've observed that I can use this tool to help my community, my country, and the world as a globe, wherever we need to develop language skills. I had someone approaching me just about 2 weeks ago that they want me to work on the topics. So when we select the curriculum, we develop the whole concept, and then I teach it as a form of a lesson to be recorded, and he would want to take that to his school for the student to watch the video and then learn the language, because the teachers are not that very qualified. They don't have the expertise. Initially, our plans are that we want to help the teachers, train them, but until they are fully trained, these are the ways that we can use to help them. Asking Prof, which technological procedures would you suggest will help to expand this, not just to the school, but to the remote areas in my country, so that they can all benefit from this opportunity to develop their language skills? It's a passion I carry. I really want to use this to help my community and then the country at large. What do you suggest will help us, please? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Emmanuel. So yeah, I agree that, you know, learning language is important. It's obviously something that can benefit local communities. Here in the community where I live, English language is also a big thing because of migration to the United States. And increasingly we receive more and more tourists from the United States and Canada. So young people here also, you know, are interested in learning English language to help with tourism opportunities. From what I understood, your question is it's kind of, there's a lot of rural communities, and how can, you know, you use your tools to help young people acquire more languages. And I think that kind of comes to the issue of you know, the digital technologies that all of us rely on today. I would say that the computer that we're all using right now to communicate on is a fascinating tool, but how appropriate is it if we go back to those criteria, right? So if you're going to rely on internet signal and computers or cell phones or whatever it might be, I think we should go back to those criteria that we mentioned, right? That there should be someone locally trained who can fix that. Like, we might not be able to operate a autonomous Wi-Fi system or anything like that, but we certainly should be able to have someone in a local community who can fix a computer if it breaks down. You know, a local IT specialist, maybe in the local schools, that can try and yeah, fix things that break down, because these things eventually do, right? So that's just one example. I think that, you know, go back always to those criteria that we mentioned at the beginning, and how, because I mean, in an ideal world, it would be great if you could travel, you know, and participate with those students one-on-one, personalized. I think that's more humane. But we also know that, you know, I'm not able to travel to Africa and have this class with all of you. So I understand that there are limitations that technology, digital technologies do and should play a role. But at the same time, let's go back to those criteria and try and be, you know, honest about how we can try and allow digital technologies to be more owned autonomously by the local communities, managed by them, and not necessarily where digital technologies has come in and the worst of it is what takes over. So again, like the image of young people who use the internet to play around on Facebook or play these video games instead of using it for learning a new language, for example, right?
Thank you very much again, Prof. Roberts. Ladies and gentlemen, I do understand the topic being in line today is so critical, so important, so fundamental that we certainly would like to ask questions for 1 or 2 hours, maybe longer. Very unfortunately, we cannot truly accommodate everybody. I want to sincerely apologize for this deficiency, so to speak. But let's go quickly to what I would call the last question from Joseph Akara. We are ready for you, Joseph.
Hello, good everyone. Okay, so I'm Joseph from Nigeria, right? Just a little bit of contribution, not question actually, but just to contribute to one of the important issue raised by Mr. Edwin Nana, right? Yeah, so concerning how to harness the local talent, I call them local talent, right? They didn't go to school and they have these potentials to offer, and for them to think out of the box, for them to be able to produce something from scratch that could actually be of benefit to humanity. I think I see that as a great talent, but in a way I've thought about this as well. I think if we can have a probably indigenous organization like companies, or have a forum whereby this talent can be brought together, right? And just like the same way Mr. Robert mentioned about a school in India that organizes for women to learn about solar panel and all that. So if there will be a body that will help to get the necessary certifications, trainings, and preparation for the market sales of these ideas, I think it will go a long way to also help in Africa, instead of depending on the Western companies or people to come and pick them for development in the Western world and all that. So we in this community, probably from this region, can think of how can come together, have a registered company, for example, bring these young talents, grow them up, prepare them, and train them for professionalism and all that. That's my own contribution I would like to make on that. All right, thank you very much.
We highly appreciate your contribution, Joseph.
Yeah.
And once more, dear participants, remember the entire class has, as usual, been recorded. The recording will be shared with you. And additionally, if you go to our Facebook page, scrolling down, you will see all the previous presentations, all the previous classes, including this one. It will also be available there. Again, I am so sorry that we cannot afford everybody the opportunity to ask questions, but I am very, very thankful to you. And I'm saying this on behalf of the entire Atlantic International University. Let's now quickly go back to Professor Tobias Roberts for his concluding remark.
Thank you, everyone, for your comments, for your questions. I always appreciate interaction. So yeah, I guess I just conclude by saying that appropriate technology, like I mentioned, unfortunately, I think has been kind of fading in recent years as we move more and more into a technological society. And I would say that one of the biggest challenges of any type of community development work is trying to take these criteria that we've been talking about and think about them, right? And implement them in whatever type of technologies we might adopt. Return to those three things. How can technology contribute to a world that's more beautiful, more healthy, and more permanent, right? Those are the things that I think are extremely important to think about. And again, I thank you all, and I look forward to sharing a class again sometime in the future.
Thank you, very nicely said. We highly appreciate that opportunity, Professor Tobias Roberts. Ladies and gentlemen, was the last word. And thank you for joining us. Be blessed, everybody.
Thank you.
For the wonderful presentation, Prof. Thank you. That was very valuable.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.
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 Bye.